Hello and welcome to The Loop. I'm Susan Ball, a tax partner in RSM specialising in employment-related tax matters and the current president of the Chartered Institute of Taxation. The Loop is where we untangle today's business issues by throwing real-life scenarios at a panel of experts from RSM. Today's episode is a little different and is part of our mini-series dedicated to all things tax. Tax is always topical for lively discussion, but it's a conversation with real heat at the moment. We're asking some of the leading lights in the profession their views, including what they would do if they were put in charge of the UK tax system. For this episode, my guest is Myrtle Lloyd. During her 19-year civil service career before joining HMRC in 2022, Myrtle has held a variety of leadership roles, spanning strategy, programme project delivery, operations, IT, at both the Department of Work and Pensions and the Home Office. She was also Chief Operating Officer at Her Majesty's Passport Office, as well as the Registrar General for England and Wales. While at the Home Office, Myrtle also had the title of Head of Profession for Operational Delivery. She was appointed to HMRC as Director General for Customer Services in January 2021, taking up her role in February. Myrtle, welcome to The Loop.
Hi, Susan. Glad to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. A lot of us will know you, as we said, as the Director General of Customer Services at HMRC, having overall responsibility for delivery of consistent customer services and for providing customers with a joined up support they expect across all the channels in the ways that best suit them. But what does that mean in practice? Can you tell us a little bit more about what the role entails?
So, Customer Services Group encompasses four operational businesses. We administer child benefits and tax credits. We also run customs operations. And of course, the bulk of our business is helping small, medium sized businesses and individuals with their tax affairs. And we also run the debt operations. Those are our operational businesses, but I also have responsibility for the transforming of our services and taking us into the digital world and being a truly digital service organization. Now, HMRC has been on that journey for a number of years. We're now ready on the cusp of our next step up in terms of digitalizing our services. I'm really, really excited to be part of that journey.
I mean, listening to that and obviously having seen what you did previously, I was going to ask you if there was a particular reason why you moved departments, but I might have guessed it. But perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about that and what you can bring from those previous roles to help HMRC with that transformation.
So, the first thing, I was very drawn by HMRC's purpose and vision, which is very much around making sure that money is available to fund UK public services and helping families and individuals with targeted financial support. So that was very much aligned with my core values and where I wanted to be in terms of public service. I think also when I look back at the role that HMRC played in the pandemic, really in the forefront of the pandemic, delivering really vital services, and then the role that HMRC is set to play in the economic recovery. So those were really things that real big pull factors, along with the fact that when, as customer services organizations go, there isn't a bigger job than this, both in government as well as perhaps in the private sector. So all of those things were a real attraction for me. And then when you think about some of the personal experiences I could bring to bear, I have very recently come into HMRC. It's now nearly 2 years from Her Majesty's Passport Office, where I had spent nearly 6 years in transforming that business from vastly paper and phone-based business into a digital business. And I've also done quite a bit of work both in the DWP and in the private sector before that on technology-enabled change, but very much from a service delivery perspective. So it's taking all of those experiences and having a much bigger playground here in terms of what we're trying to do in HMRC. So it's a coming together of quite a few things, which made it really exciting. So for me, this is my dream job.
That's fantastic. We'll probably talk a little bit about some of those aspects as we go through this, if I may. But perhaps what I'd like to start with is self assessment, because we've just had the filing deadline, it's passed. Could you tell me a bit more about this year's filing figures, how that's gone? What's the experience at HMRC in relation to the filing that we've just had?
So we've had a really good response, and I think we also this year did quite a bit of campaigns in the lead up, make people aware and encourage early filing. So I think all of those have paid off. However, I think that it's safe to say we're always busy at this time of the year, and this year was no different. So in spite of all of the early nudges that we're trying to get people to file earlier, we still have last minute filings, and those really did have an impact on our phone line, certainly in the last 2 days. But there were also some really interesting statistics when we're looking at filing patterns. Just in excess of 3,000 people did their self assessment on Christmas Day. Nearly 20,000 filed on New Year's Eve. With every year, we're constantly learning from our experience. So we know that getting people to file earlier helps. We also know that trying to encourage people to use our digital services really helps as well. So we can reserve the phone lines for those who absolutely don't have either the means to interact with us digitally or the services are not available. So I think the more that we can get people who can and where the service is available to use our digital services, the quality is really high. We're constantly improving it, and satisfaction rates are always in the high 80s for those services.
Hopefully, people will start filing as early as they possibly can, and maybe all of the digital services will help with that. One of the other things I'd probably just like to touch on is that we heard a lot about HMRC's priorities change during COVID, and you mentioned that obviously in some of the fantastic work that was done by the department in helping support employers, particularly, but others as well, as part of the COVID schemes. But staff moved on to other areas to be able to deal with that. And I remember reading at one point, unfortunately, there was a backlog, I think, of 3.3 million pieces of post. So, what's happening now at HMRC to get back to business as usual, meet service standards, and clear all this backlog?
Safe to say COVID was a huge challenge, not just for us, but for everybody. And when it struck, I was really proud of our ability to almost turn our business on a sixpence to go from an in the office business into people able to deliver the services from their homes. However, in order to do so, we had to make some choices. So we pretty much prioritized the work. We were still, in the throes of our EU exit. We prioritized definitely the COVID schemes and making sure that certainly our benefits services, child benefit and tax credit, that people who needed the money got the money. And in doing so, of course, there were some parts of our business that we had to put on hold for a bit, and that's why our correspondence built up to 3.3 million last year. Just to put that in perspective, with a large transactional business like ours, at any given time, we've got about 2 million pieces of post in the system working through, and that's not backlog, that's just work in progress. And when we have our peak events like self-assessment filing, they can go up to 2.5 million-ish. So 3.3 million was above our normal. Now, we did put in place a plan last year to bring that down, and we had that down to about just under 2 million at the start of last year. In learning from that last year, what we did do is put in place a real drive to make people aware of our digital services. So the more that we could get people doing stuff online via the app or via their personal tax account, the more that would free up the traditional channels like the phones, the correspondence for the more complex stuff, or for customers who cannot interact with us digitally. It's a combination of getting on top of the work, really focusing on getting the backlogs out of the way. We still currently have a number of hotspots, but by and large, certainly our post has recovered to where we need it to be. So now the focus is on making sure that we give a good level of service across all of our channels.
So, Myrtle, I was reading the other day that HMRC employs something like 63,000 people, and in the past 5 years, when I looked at it, the number of customer services staff had actually reduced from 25 down to 19. With that reduction, there's got to be challenges you're facing. How do you think the technology, the introduction of new systems could benefit HMRC at this stage, and the challenges it's facing in trying to deal with all of those things we've just talked about?
The answer, as you say, Susan, has got to be in the digital services. And the more that we can automate and encourage customers and allow customers who can to self-serve to do so via our digital channels. I think the approach is in two halves. One is driving people and making people aware of the digital channels and the digital offerings that are already available. I was quite struck by how many people were not that aware that we even had an HMRC app. You can access your personal tax account via the app, where you can find your tax reference number, you can make self assessment payments, you can find your national insurance number, get your employment income and history for your tax returns. So, all of those are available, and those are some of the things that quite a lot of people contact us on the phone for. We've also got digital assistants that help people through the phone channel. So, a lot of people who access those digital assistants when they come in through the phone channel, about half of them, their queries are answered through automated means. We're also constantly, updating our guidance and help sheets and YouTube videos, live webinars. So what we're looking to do is communicate that out and make people aware, and then encourage them to use those, while we're also continuing to enhance the services that we've got, putting more into our personal tax account and onto the app, while we're building some of the bigger transformational elements that will look to eliminate some of the contacts altogether, that will look to do a lot more data sharing at source. So you take away contact altogether where it doesn't need to happen. I think it's a mixture of all of those, exploitation of what we have, enhancing what we have, and then building new things that will help us make sure that we continue to improve our service for customers while also keeping our sort of headcount and cost at a reasonable level.
I mean, that's fascinating, and you're probably right. There's a piece there, isn't there, about how we communicate all of those features and where people can access things. One of the things that obviously we've heard a lot of examples from recently is that people have had issues with some of the online services and telephone interactions, in that there's been long delays sometimes when you're trying to ring and get somebody to answer your query. One that struck me the other day was that there was a difficulty somebody was having in relation to paying their tax liability, like CGT, for example. And obviously, that's got to be a worry, because we're talking about exactly that. We want to be able to collect as much money in so that we can pay for other services. And so HMRC has been targeted, obviously, with trying to reduce the tax gap. I believe it was about 32 billion in 2021, and that's about 5.1% of overall tax liabilities. So we've talked a little bit about some of the services, but have you got specific things you're going to do to address that sort of area?
So I think the prize for us there is around moving more of our contacts to digital. We've also recently introduced into the phone service the ability to send an SMS text message to give people a link into the right places, either guidance or elsewhere, where they can get their answers. We also, having introduced a new telephony service, we're looking constantly at making sure that we route the right people to the right advisors to get more of a once and done service, rather than being bounced around the patch. So we're not looking to set up dedicated lines, but we're looking to use the technology to make sure that people use the channel that's most appropriate for them. And then when they do use our phone channels, that they're channeled through to the right place, getting as close to a one contact resolution as possible.
That sounds like it'd be fantastic. When it comes to phoning HMRC, I understand there have been challenges associated with the quantity of calls. We've talked about that, and obviously that's particularly with those peaks. And you mentioned just that particular feature that's come in more recently about pushing people onto giving them links. Am I right in saying that, for example, the self-assessment helpline, in the run-up, you had a third of extra calls and you had to put extra resources on it? I think it was sort of 850 extra people just to cope with the demand in the run-up to self-assessment. Is that something that you see you have to do on a regular basis, moving teams around to kind of concentrate on specific pinch points?
I think the for our self-assessment peak, that's always our biggest event. We've got, various peaks through the year. We've got the VAT peak, we've got tax credit peaks in the summer, and we have for a number of years moved colleagues around to service the peak. And in doing so, there are some other things that we deprioritize for a period of time. This year, well, certainly in the lead up to the self-assessment tax, we had about a 9% increase in call volumes, which might sound small in percentage terms. It's 9% of quite a large number. What is the prize for us is to try and flatten the peak so you don't get that really spiky contact, getting people to file earlier, but also then trying to encourage people to use where they can self-serve to do so. So, as an example, in November, we had about 1.5 million calls from customers who could have found that information much quicker elsewhere. So those kinds of contact where they don't add that much value to the customer and they could have got that information quicker and faster elsewhere. Those are the kinds of things we're trying to eliminate, as well as encouraging people to change some of their filing behavior.
You mentioned then obviously again about the peak we have a self-assessment period, and I'm sure all of those advisors who have to deal with clients on self-assessment would also be happy if clients got their information into them in a timely fashion so that they could smooth the peak, because they always have a busy period obviously in January as well. You said that I think only complex queries would be dealt with by the agent dedicated helpline for self-assessment as a result of the backlog. Could we see that happening again, and was it successful?
Yes, and I think that is a really good example, along with the work that we did with our stakeholder community during COVID, and saying, well, how can we work in partnership with our stakeholder community to help them help us? And I think we would be looking to do more of that. So, where we have a peak in one area, to say, look, if your query and your work is not in that one area, can you try and do it later or do it earlier? That way, we make sure that we reserve the right channels to help our different customers, but we also are dealing with the timely element of those peaks. So I think that it worked really well this year. We're looking to say, well, what more can we do in partnership with our stakeholder community to make that more of a norm rather than a one-off.
Obviously, that's part of what HMRC offers to help people work out how to make sure that they can get their tax right. But the other is the online guidance, and as you said, the online services, and they're an integral part of obviously the customer service picture, which you mentioned very much at the beginning. So, taking sort of online services, we've seen some new features. You mentioned the app a few times. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about that, and as in where is it going to go in the future? If there's anything more exciting coming up.
We will be putting more services onto the app and making sure that we publicize those. We are right now working on a single customer account where there's one place for customers to go in and view all of their information, access through the app or through the personal tax account. In the coming year, we're also looking at customers being able to enact some simple change of circumstances via that route as well. Then, as the one login for government is rolled out, the customers will also be able to use one set of sign-on details to access multiple HMRC services. So that makes it easier as well. We're also looking at developing more new ways for customers to pay. We introduce self-serve time to pay, and we'll be introducing that into the VAT space. Those are the things we'll be looking to do in the next year. So we're very carefully looking at where are some of the biggest contact sort of numbers or areas that customers contact us on, and what is it that they contact us for most, and how do we make those priority for us to digitize.
Sounds amazing, and hopefully we'll all see that coming down the line. When HMRC moved obviously to gov.uk, some of the content that was there on the old site was changed. It's not as easy perhaps to find for some people. You need to understand sometimes what the search words are you need to use. And how does HMRC manage to communicate all of these things to taxpayers? I mean, you've mentioned that you were surprised at one point, I think, that not as many people knew about the app. What are you doing to be able to communicate that out to people, and also what's work's being done actually to make sure that those online services guidance, for example, is the best it can be for taxpayers?
We've got a fairly comprehensive program of communications planned for the next year, because there is, I think, there's no point in building services and then not telling people about it. So we're saying, well, okay, so what can we do? How can we be clever in this space? And really looking at how we segment our customers and target and tailor messages that will get the best or nudge the right kinds of behavior, and then understanding their needs and moving them to the most appropriate channel to fulfill their needs and drive the right outcomes. We are spending quite a lot of time on thinking about user experience and how is it that people interact with our services, and then whether like our guidance is that clear enough, because we've got to strike the right balance. Some of our guidance, we've got people who are tax experts, such as yourself, who will understand a higher degree of complex guidance than perhaps somebody who isn't a more layperson. So how can we make our guidance simpler so that they don't drive additional contacts as well? So I think quite a bit of work in this space, a constant learning and testing that we go along. But I also really seeking feedback from our stakeholder communities like yourself about what is working and what isn't working, and creating that ability to do continuous improvement as well. And that's pretty much for us the way forward.
Well, I can vouch for the fact that sitting on some of the HMRC forums, that obviously you do take that feedback. I suppose moving on a bit to talking about some of the things that have been hot topics recently, making tax digital. I couldn't really have you here without talking about that. I mean, obviously it's been delayed, and I think that there's a huge sigh of relief from those of us in the profession about that. But there's some challenges there. There's obviously a time period under which it's delayed, and then there's a gradual introduction for certain groups of people. And I also spotted that we've got issues perhaps for unincorporated businesses having to report their accounting results on a tax year basis from 24-25. So perhaps you can kind of explain a bit about the programme for those people who haven't kind of caught up to date and want to know where it is now anyway with those announcements, but also how it's going to help those going forward, and at what stages.
We remain fully committed to the successful delivery for MTD for income tax. And the extra time is not about slowing down development. So development is continuing at pace, but the extra time is really about how do we prepare our, sort of our customer base, having learned from our implementation of MTD for VAT. So we're looking at more engagement with our stakeholder community, with our customer base. We're looking at more pilots and more targeted pilots, learning from what works and what doesn't work, rather than doing a big bang approach. In terms of details, we are looking the first tranche of mandation in April 26 will be for self-employed customers and landlords who are earning in excess of 50,000. That will be followed a year later, April 27, for those earning 30,000 and above. We're also working on reviewing the needs of small businesses that earn below 30,000 to say, well, what are their specific needs? It might be different from those in the higher threshold. So I guess it's all about, for us, it's all about engaging with and co-creating with our stakeholder community, and really taking baby steps, learning and putting that back into our design, and having a much more controlled rollout.
Certainly, I can remember back in when we had to deal with real-time information for pay as you earn, that a similar approach of bringing people through it gradually seemed to work quite well. And and the larger firms going in for perhaps the smaller ones. But it's sounding very positive. I can't help but mention the fact that obviously, as I said, I think earlier, we've had quite a few people contact us at the Institute around concerns with service levels over the period of time. One that came up quite a bit actually was in relation to VAT registrations. They seem to have been a bit behind, and members have reached out not only because that impacts the VAT system, but it also impacts things like potential for grant opportunities and loans. When I was looking into this, I saw that HMRC had a particular issue at one point with a targeted fraud, and that had caused part of the problems. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about that. Also, where you are now in relation to, I think the service standard is 40 days, if I'm not mistaken.
Last July, our VAT system came under significant attack from VAT registration fraud. We saw a large increase in the number of registrations being sent to HMRC. To deal with this, we needed to put in a number of measures to protect our genuine customers and to stop the fraudulent activities. And a lot of these measures were very much needed human intervention, which is what has sort of created a bit of a backlog. We're pretty much, I think, most of the registrations are going through in 40 days now. We will be recovered to our service levels by the end of the financial year at the very latest, if not before. But we also shared some best practice tips with Richard Wild and our stakeholder community, because the VAT, a lot of VAT registrations are automated, and the reason they fall out of the automation is when people fill in the boxes incorrectly or put incorrect information. The more that can go through automated, the less you'll need that human intervention, which is the bit that holds things up. It wasn't the best of time. It never is the best of time to have these organized attacks, but we are through the bulk of the work, and we should be recovered very soon.
I think it really helps people to understand sometimes that why you've got some of the challenges. Explaining that to people and why perhaps now there was a delay, it does at least help them understand. Would you like to leave us with something, particularly Myrtle, on the conversation and to get the message out about what HMRC is doing?
Absolutely. The first thing I wanted to say was we really value the relationship that we have with all of our stakeholder communities and yours in particular. And the feedback that we get from yourselves are really good to help us improve our services. So the more that we can continue in that vein and work as true partners in this space, solving problems together, is something that I'd like us to continue to do more of. And I think the other bit is really looking for you to help us in our digitalization journey. So how can we try and make our customer groups aware of the services that we've got and encourage customers to use the channels that are most appropriate for them to be able to get to their answers or their outcomes as quickly as possible. And in making sure that we do all of that, then we will make sure that we have a decent level of service across our different channels. So we are really looking at you to help us with our channel shift ambitions as well.
Well, thank you. I'm sure we will. Thank you very much, Myrtle, for taking the time to talk to us today. That's certainly given us a lot of food for thought. And it's been actually great to know that HMRC is on a journey to improve customer services and how people interact with them. So many thanks again for today's guest, Myrtle Lloyd. If you would like to contact us and talk tax, you can find us on www.rsmuk.com, and our contact details are in the show notes. To stay in the loop, just subscribe to The Loop. We're always keen to hear your views. Please rate us and leave us a review. We look forward to you joining us on the next episode.